to stand with me as we welcome Dr. Dan Rea.
I forgot some of those things. It's not an official doctor, it's only when you're a lawyer, you're a juris doctor. So I appreciate the appellation doctor, Basil, but it's really not doctor. It's just plain old Dan Rea. Thank you very much for having me here. I think there have been 5 featured speakers before me, and they're all very tough acts to follow. But I certainly want to congratulate the team. I also am delighted to introduce my Pastor Basil. I've also heard the remarks by Rabbi Wars. And Rabbi, I know that you're involved with Jews for Jesus.
Well, not officially, I was.
You were.
They threw me out.
Well, they did. Well, okay, fine, that's okay. Anyway, as a Catholic, as a Roman Catholic, I want you to know that I'm a Christian for Israel. As Rabbi Morris mentioned, surely the Israelis do not use their children as human shields.
That's right.
But there are used that have been used for many, many years in the Middle East for that battle. I think it's something we all need to understand more as we go on. I want to thank Ian Fox, the president, for having invited me, as well as Marie Sturgis, the executive director, who first contacted me to appear today. I also want to thank an old friend, Henry Lutine, who is here, who is your chairman of the board, who I've known since 1970, believe it or not. And actually, I've known his wife, my cousin, his wife, Mary Ann Rea, who is very active for the Massachusetts Citizens for Life for many, many years. And I also want to thank Father Mullen for having noticed that photograph in the Boston Globe on it's a Friday morning. Friday morning. I want you to know I brought it with me, and I think you're going to appreciate it. And I also want to thank Bishop Hennessy for being here. And I want to thank everyone, all of you, the Cardinal Spellman Choir, the musicians down front. I went to church this morning, and I want to tell you, I've been more inspired in the last hour or so here. I say this with all due respect. Finish the thought that I oftentimes listening to the homilies in Mass. And one of the things I'm going to talk to Bishop Hennessy about later on is getting better homilies in Mass. And maybe we have to get more Father Mullins and more Rabbi Morris. Because when they speak, they do not speak in metaphors or enigmas. They speak the truth, and they tell it like it is. We meet today in a very interesting and historic building, Faneuil Hall here in Boston, where over 230 years ago, concerned citizens of an embryonic nation gathered to debate the great issues of their day. Their discussions and their arguments, in part where we sit and stand today, resulted in the Declaration of Independence that we all know was signed 300 miles south of here in Philadelphia back on July 4th, 1776. And ironically, my daughter, Catherine, is in Philadelphia today on a campus visit at the University of Pennsylvania. So everything sort of kind of pulls together, trust me. This great document upon which our nation was founded, the greatest nation in the history of the world, in my opinion, reads in part, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," unquote. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life mentioned first. Besides meeting today in a very interesting place, we also meet at a very interesting time and moment in history.
That's right.
For the first time in a long time, we've elected a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress who appear more committed to the concept of choice, at least in terms of the issue of abortion, than any other combination of president and Congress before them.
That's right.
The new president, who's been in office now for only 5 days, has already made it very clear that he hopes to pass the most sweeping piece of pro-choice legislation in our history, the so-called Freedom of Choice Act, or FOCA. And you heard about that today. The new president has already issued an executive order within the first few days, repealing an order of his predecessor, which allows your federal tax dollars, my federal tax dollars, to flow overseas in support of foreign programs that support and or encourage abortion. So in 5 short days, some campaign promises have already been kept and more. It's almost as if abortion now is part of our foreign policy. Roe versus Wade, the court's leading decision on abortion rights, is now 36 years and 3 days old. This week, tens of thousands from across America traveled to Washington, D.C., as Father Mellon mentioned earlier, for the annual March for Life. Hardly noticed by the news media. I really tried to find stories in newspapers and news reports this week about the March for Life, and I found very, very little. But as I looked at all the TV stations, the cable network news and the network newscasts, I kept remembering the phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in my mind. Maybe it was because I was preparing to speak to you today. The Boston Globe, our region's most influential newspaper, our newspaper of record, has already been alluded to by Father Mullen a couple of moments ago. And I was sitting there smiling because I brought the Globe's newspaper with me. And they say one picture is worth 1,000 words. Here's the picture. And I know that all of you in the back row won't be able to see what I'm about to show you. But this is page 2 of the Boston Globe on Tuesday. No other coverage in the newspaper that day subsequently that I could find. And I made a good effort to find it. Fairly prominent photograph, which is entitled at the top, Roe v. Wade Anniversary. And I suspect probably there are a lot of people who read the Boston Globe who don't even know what Roe versus Wade was. And there are pictures, a handful of demonstrators with the columns of the Supreme Court behind them. And there are 3 signs obvious to the readers. One sign, most prominently displayed, says, keep abortion legal. Now, the marchers, playing upon the phrase, yes we can, the Obama campaign, had some signs, one over here in the corner, if you look real closely, you'll see it. It says, yes we can terminate abortion. And in some group, it's studentsforlife.org. The other sign that the Globe chose to, when they crop a picture, they sometimes distort the picture a little bit. And the most prominent sign that you see in this Globe picture, photograph, simply says, yes, we can terminate. It somehow omits what I consider to be a fairly important word. Yes, we can terminate abortion. So the Boston Globe, and, you know, they're beautiful. I mean, they wear their bias on their front page day in and day out. And there is no group or organization or issue that they are more biased against than the issue that you represent, pro-life.
Right.
By the way, just as a reporter, now a talk show host, but as a full reporter, I do have to give them credit in the, what we call the cut line in the business, the little line, paragraph, whatever, that explains the picture. Although if you look at the picture, you'd have no clue what it was. They did give the coverage of 250,000 demonstrators a 52-word caption. 52 words. I didn't do the math, but that's the it is just amazing. I don't know if this photo was picked and cropped intentionally, but I have my suspicions. From the perspective of many, and I suspect we can count the editors of the Boston Globe in this group, the issue's now settled. Next year, don't even expect a misleading photo from, as Father Mullen says, Pravda on Morrissey Boulevard. Even though Roe versus Wade is now 36 years old in case law, aspects of that decision have produced a host of other issues, or as a judge might write, penumbras and emanations. That was the language that Justice William O. Douglas used in the underpinning case of Roe versus Wade, Griswold versus Connecticut. Penumbras and emanations. I couldn't understand it when I was in law school, and I'm still trying to grapple with it today. However, some of the penumbras and emanations that I like to think about in terms of Roe versus Wade are issues, serious issues, age of consent issues, parental notification issues, use of federal, meaning our taxpayer money, mandates upon hospitals and charities with religious and/or moral objection to abortion, the rights of doctors and nurses who are opposed to abortion, and of course, partial birth, or as I like to call it, live birth abortions.
Right.
But as I mentioned, now a new president and a new Congress was ready to expand without any limitations the right to abortion here in America and around the world. Why not? And the new president has already begun to direct tax dollars overseas to make abortions more accessible, in effect, an adjunct of our United States foreign policy. At a time, by the way, when we're running about, what, $10 trillion in debt, makes a lot of sense to me, economically and financially, as well as morally. Ironically, I might add, and think about this for a moment, these total choice advocates in the area of abortion do not find that concept of choice for underprivileged American children who the accident of their geographic birthplace find themselves forever trapped in a failing urban public school system. The next time you talk to an abortion advocate and they start talking about choice, see what they think about choice for kids and have the option, poor kids, to get the same sort of education that all of us have received or that I've been able to provide to my children in schools that are better than the public schools. Now, as a society, we rightfully anguish over the fate of endangered species. We recoil in horror at the killing of baby puppy seals. Protesters and litigators enjoin construction projects to protect rattlesnake habitats, snail darters, and fairy shrimp. And those are all legitimate. I've never heard of fairy shrimp either, but trust me, they exist, and there have been cases dealing with fairy shrimp. We can't see enough photographs of that adorable baby bear born in captivity in Germany. We sit up and we pay close attention to every animal alert broadcast on local television. And we spend hours transfixed in front of cable network news on the story of 3-year-old Kaylee Anthony, who disappeared in Florida, probably murdered by her mother, or on an Alabama teenager who vanishes on a high school trip off the island of Aruba. I have no clue what happened to her. Yet, when it comes to the life of the unborn, many Americans display a studied indifference at best.
That's right.
In a nation founded on the concept of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That is right.
These contradictory impulses from Americans, from people of goodwill, are very difficult to reconcile. I listened to an interview as I was literally writing my presentation today. And again, I wrote a presentation because I could speak of this probably for an hour, and you don't need that. I wanted to be as concise as I could. But as I was writing this presentation today, some would say a speech, it's a presentation, I'm listening to an interview with the new president as I was actually composing my thoughts. In that interview, Barack Obama provided me with very critical insight. You know, it's funny, reverends and rabbi, how things work. On Friday afternoon, I heard the president say something very simple, yet very profound. Mr. Obama said that if somebody honestly believes that life begins at conception, he could not argue with them over the opposition, over their opposition to abortion. Think about that for a moment. He is basically saying he does not believe that life begins at conception. But he's saying that he cannot argue with people like us who believe life begins at conception. And I think that that is a very interesting observation by him and a concession. Because if we can convince the American people that life does begin at conception, because I don't think the American people have thought about it.
Right.
But I think if we can convince the American people that life begins at conception, we might even be able to win this argument ultimately. Sometimes in all the complexity of the legal mumbo-jumbo, and believe me, as a lawyer, I know legal mumbo-jumbo, we forget the obvious. Life does begin at conception. If that developing fetus within the womb is not life, how would you characterize it? As a basketball? A bunch of broccoli? If it's permitted to grow, it develops inexorably into another B word, a baby. I could say it another way. If not interrupted by nature or a doctor, that embryonic mass will develop into a human being that even if perfectly healthy upon birth, will not walk on its own for months, maybe a year. That little human being will eventually learn to talk, but not until the age of 2, and hopefully eventually to read, write, and reason. Maybe, Mr. Obama, that little embryonic mass of tissue someday may become President of the United States if he or she is allowed to develop naturally. Now let me just say one point that some of you might disagree with, and if you do, that's okay, but I genuinely believe this. I believe that there are good and decent people on both sides of this debate. There are extremists in deed and thought on both sides, but they really contribute nothing to the debate and the discussion. And I know that pro-life Americans do understand that there are people on extreme ends of both of these issues. Those people are never going to be open to reason. And I'm talking about the people, the bombers, the abortion clinic bombers, as well as the people on the other end who, I don't know how to describe it. But there are people who believe in choice, who I think their minds may be able to be persuaded over time. There are pro-choice advocates who will never acknowledge the potential for life in every aborted fetus. Their word, or every aborted child, our word, and their minds will never be changed. But they know this deep down. All of these people know this deep down. That a fetus is something fundamentally different than a human. This is the debate that we must continue. When does life begin? This is not a religious or even a moral question. It's a scientific argument. And you're on the right side of science and morality. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of life. I have touched on the philosophy of life. All of you understand that philosophy and practice that philosophy every day. But as a former Vice President Al Gore, in his campaign to persuade others of the dire consequences of global warming, and could we use the word global warming today, ladies and gentlemen? He likes to use inconvenient truths. That's the name of his movement. Well, there are some inconvenient truths available to you. Abortion is a medical procedure practiced in a disproportionate way on poor women, and on black women, and on Hispanic women. The following statistics that I'm about to share with you are derived from pro-abortion sources. You got to know what the other side is saying and thinking, such as the Alan Guttmacher Institute and Planned Parenthood's Family Planning Perspectives. Black women today are 3 times more likely to have an abortion than white women. Hispanic women are roughly twice as likely to have an abortion than a white woman. 13.8% of abortions are performed on women with family incomes of $60,000 or above. Well, that means over 86% of abortions are performed on women with incomes below $60,000. Over 25% of all abortions are performed on really poor women, those with family incomes below $15,000, and almost half of the abortions performed in the United States are performed on women whose family's income income is less than $30,000. Which group of women are sacrificing more of their children at the altar of abortion than black and Hispanic women? There is no group here in America which is losing more young people, more people who could grow up to be president of the United States than minorities here in America. In summary, poor black and Hispanic women are undergoing a disproportionate number of abortions, removing a disproportionate number of poor black and Hispanic children from future U.S. populations. Interesting concept to think about. In his inaugural address last Tuesday, President Barack Obama, he himself the child of a single mom, who maybe if she wasn't in Kansas, growing up as a white woman, and if she was growing up in another section of the country, a few years later, maybe President Barack Obama, we never would have known President Barack Obama. Just a concept to think about, the circumstances out of which he came. As I mentioned in the inaugural address last Tuesday, President Barack Obama referred to the desperate situation facing those who won our freedom from the power of the crown. The President alluded, of course, to General Washington, to Valley Forge, how dark those days looked for those committed to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How do you think this nation's abolitionists felt when the Dred Scott's decision was handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1857? Probably a little like some of you might feel in January of 2009. For 31 years as a television reporter, I was obligated to remain objective. My role has changed now that I've entered the arena of talk radio. So I mentioned WBZ Monday through Friday today. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak openly with you today in this historic hall. I do not know and I cannot predict where the politics of abortion will lead in the years ahead. In many respects, people of goodwill on both sides of the issue will frame this debate and continue to argue the issues. But I do hope that we all remember that the founders based the idea of America on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because without life, there's no liberty, and there can be no happiness. I want to thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you today in this historic hall and giving me a chance to share my view, my perspective on abortion and politics. Thank you all very much.